Welcome to Midnight Murmur. Here, the night comes alive with chilling tales and spine-tingling stories. If you crave the thrill of the unknown and the eerie whisper of the supernatural, you've found your new haunt. Join us as we dive into the darkest corners of the human mind, unraveling short horror stories that will keep you up at night. Hit that subscribe button, turn off the lights, and let the murmur begin. Story 1. Silence. In the heart of a small, unassuming town nestled deep in the woods, there was a house that everyone avoided. It stood at the end of a long, winding road, its windows boarded up, and its yard overgrown with weeds. For years, it was just a local legend, a story to scare children and deter curious teenagers. But beneath the rumors and whispers, there was a chilling truth waiting to be unearthed. One autumn evening, Emily, a young journalist with a penchant for the macabre, decided to investigate the old house. She had heard the stories of people entering and never coming out, of eerie noises and ghostly apparitions, but she was determined to uncover the truth. Armed with her camera and notebook, she made her way to the house just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air grew colder as Emily approached the front door. With a deep breath, she pushed it open. The hinges creaked ominously, echoing through the empty halls. Dust motes floated in the air, illuminated by the fading light from outside. The house was eerily silent, save for the occasional groan of the old wooden floorboards. Emily began her exploration, snapping photos and jotting down notes. Each room seemed more decrepit than the last, filled with broken furniture and cobwebs. As she ventured deeper into the house, she noticed something peculiar. The further she went, the quieter it became. It was as if the house itself was absorbing sound, creating a vacuum of silence. In the basement, she found a small, hidden door. It was old and worn, the paint peeling away to reveal the wood beneath. With a sense of dread, Emily opened it. Inside, she found a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. She hesitated for a moment, but then descended, the stairs creaking under her weight. The silence down here was absolute. Emily couldn't even hear her own footsteps. At the bottom of the stairs, she found a small room, its walls covered in strange symbols and markings. In the center of the room stood an ancient-looking stone altar, and on it lay a single, pristine bell. Curiosity overwhelmed her. Emily reached out and touched the bell. The moment her fingers made contact, a deafening, bone-chilling scream filled the room. She clamped her hands over her ears, but it did nothing to muffle the sound. It was as if the scream was coming from within her own mind. Suddenly, the room was filled with ghostly figures, their mouths open in silent screams. Emily's heart raced as she backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The figures closed in on her, their faces contorted in anguish. In her panic, she stumbled and fell, hitting her head on the stone floor. When Emily awoke, she was no longer in the basement. She was standing in the middle of the living room, the bell still in her hand. The house was silent once more, but something was different. She felt a cold presence behind her. Slowly, she turned around and found herself face to face with a woman in tattered clothes, her eyes hollow and lifeless. The woman reached out, her fingers brushing against Emily's cheek. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Now you're one of us." Emily tried to scream, but no sound came out. The silence enveloped her, wrapping around her like a shroud. She dropped the bell, but it made no noise as it hit the floor. The last thing she saw before darkness consumed her was the woman's twisted smile. Days later, when Emily's colleagues came looking for her, they found the house empty. Her camera and notebook were left behind, but there was no sign of Emily. They searched every room, but it was as if she had vanished into thin air. The town soon added Emily's disappearance to the list of strange occurrences surrounding the old house. And every now and then, on quiet nights, you could hear the faint sound of a bell ringing, followed by an eerie, echoing silence. Story 2. Echoes. In a remote village tucked away in the mountains, there was a legend that had been passed down for generations. It spoke of a cave hidden deep within the forest, a cave where the voices of the dead could be heard. The villagers called it the Echo Cave, and it was said to be cursed. Those who ventured inside never returned, their voices joining the chorus of the damned. Leela, a curious and adventurous young woman, had heard the stories all her life. But unlike the others, she didn't believe in curses or haunted caves. Determined to prove the legend wrong, she set out one crisp morning with a backpack full of supplies and a resolve of steel. The journey through the forest was long and arduous. The trees grew denser as she ventured deeper, their twisted branches creating a canopy that blocked out the sun. As the hours passed, an uneasy feeling began to settle in her stomach. The forest was unnaturally quiet, as if holding its breath. Finally, she found the entrance to the Echo Cave. It was a dark, yawning maw in the side of a rocky hill, almost hidden by overgrown vegetation. Leela hesitated for a moment, but her determination pushed her forward. She switched on her flashlight and stepped inside. The cave was cold and damp, the air thick with the scent of earth and decay. The sound of dripping water echoed off the walls, creating an eerie symphony. Leela's footsteps seemed unnaturally loud in the confined space. She pressed on, deeper and deeper, the cave's twisting passages leading her further into darkness. Suddenly, she heard a faint whisper, barely audible over the sound of her own breathing. She stopped and listened, her heart pounding in her chest. The whisper grew louder, turning into a multitude of voices. They were overlapping, speaking in hushed tones, some pleading, others angry, but all unmistakably human. "Who's there?" Leela called out, her voice trembling. The voices fell silent for a moment, then resumed, this time clearer and more insistent. They seemed to be coming from all directions, surrounding her. Panic began to set in, but Leela forced herself to stay calm. She continued forward, determined to find the source of the voices. As she turned a corner, her flashlight flickered and died, plunging her into complete darkness. The voices grew louder, more urgent. Leela fumbled with her backpack, pulling out a spare flashlight. When she turned it on, she found herself face to face with a ghostly figure. It was a woman, her eyes hollow and her mouth twisted in a silent scream. Behind her stood countless others, their faces etched with the same expression of torment. Leela stumbled back, her flashlight shaking in her hand. "Help us," the woman whispered, her voice echoing through the cave. Leela's mind raced. She had to get out, but the cave's passages seemed to shift and change around her. Every turn led to a dead end or back to where she started. The voices grew louder, more insistent, their words a jumble of anguish and despair. "Please, I don't know how," Leela cried, tears streaming down her face. The ghostly figures moved closer, their hands reaching out to her. Leela turned and ran, her flashlight casting wild shadows on the walls. The voices followed her, a cacophony of sorrow and anger. She stumbled and fell, her flashlight skittering across the floor. As she lay there, the voices seemed to close in, suffocating her. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The last thing she saw before darkness consumed her was the ghostly woman's face, twisted in an expression of eternal torment. Days later, a group of villagers, worried about Leela's absence, ventured into the forest to search for her. They found her backpack and flashlight near the entrance to the Echo Cave, but there was no sign of Leela. The villagers knew better than to enter the cave, and they retreated, leaving Leela's fate a mystery. The legend of the Echo Cave grew stronger, and Layla's story was added to the list of those who had disappeared within its depths. And on quiet nights, when the wind blew just right, the villagers swore they could hear the echoes of her voice, mingling with the voices of the lost souls trapped inside the cave. Story 3: Shadows. In a bustling city, where the lights never dimmed and the streets were always alive with activity, there was an old, abandoned theater. It stood at the edge of town, its grand facade crumbling, its once bright marquee now dull and lifeless. The locals called it the Shadow Theater, and it was shrouded in mystery and fear. Many years ago, the theater had been a thriving hub of entertainment, drawing crowds with its grand performances. But one fateful night, during a sold-out show, a fire broke out. The flames spread quickly, and despite the efforts of the fire brigade, many lives were lost. Since then, the theater had remained abandoned, its charred interior left to decay. The stories that circulated about the theater were chilling. People claimed to see strange shadows moving inside, even though the building was empty. Others reported hearing ghostly laughter and applause late at night. But the most terrifying tales were of those who dared to enter the theater, never to be seen again. Ethan was a paranormal investigator with a reputation for debunking myths and legends. When he heard about the Shadow Theater, he was intrigued. Armed with his equipment and a skeptical mind, he decided to spend a night inside the theater to uncover the truth. On a cold, moonless night, Ethan arrived at the theater. He forced open the rusted doors and stepped inside. The air was thick with a smell of smoke and mildew. The auditorium was eerily quiet, the rows of seats covered in a thick layer of dust. The stage, once the heart of the theater, was now a dark, foreboding space. Ethan set up his cameras and audio recorders, determined to capture any evidence of paranormal activity. Hours passed, and at first there was nothing. Just the sound of his own breathing and the distant hum of the city outside. But as midnight approached, things began to change. The temperature dropped suddenly, and Ethan could see his breath in the air. His cameras picked up strange, flickering lights moving across the stage. He heard faint whispers, just at the edge of his hearing, growing louder and more distinct with each passing minute. "Is anyone here?" Ethan called out, his voice echoing through the empty theater. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a low, chilling laugh filled the air. Ethan's heart raced as he scanned the room with his flashlight. Shadows seemed to dance along the walls, twisting and writhing in unnatural ways. His equipment beeped and whirred, detecting spikes in electromagnetic activity. Suddenly, a figure appeared on the stage. It was a man, dressed in a tattered tuxedo, his face pale and eyes hollow. He stared at Ethan with an intensity that made his blood run cold. The man began to speak, his voice echoing with an otherworldly resonance. "Welcome to the Shadow Theater," he said, a sinister smile spreading across his lips. "We've been waiting for you." Ethan tried to move, but his feet felt rooted to the spot. The shadows grew thicker, closing in around him. He could hear the voices now, a cacophony of anguish and despair, mixed with mocking laughter. The man on the stage began to laugh, a deep, menacing sound that echoed through the theater. The shadows reached out, their touch icy and suffocating. Ethan struggled, but it was as if the darkness itself was alive, wrapping around him, pulling him down. His flashlight flickered and died, plunging him into complete darkness. The last thing he heard was the man's laughter, echoing in his mind. When morning came, Ethan's colleagues arrived at the theater, expecting to find him with a wealth of footage and stories to tell. But they found the theater empty, his equipment scattered on the floor. There was no sign of Ethan. They searched every corner of the building, but it was as if he had vanished without a trace. The Shadow Theater remained, as it always had, a dark, foreboding presence at the edge of town. The stories of its haunted halls grew more sinister, and Ethan's disappearance only added to the legend. And on quiet nights, when the city lights cast long shadows, some claimed to see a figure in a tattered tuxedo, laughing in the darkness.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling content.